Hello, everyone. Welcome to our live webinar for Foster Talks. Thank you so much for being here today. Thank you for waiting patiently as we get started. For Foster Talks, we are going to be discussing the diverse needs of LGBTQ plus youth in foster care. I'm Katie. I'm the Outreach Coordinator for Boys and Girls Aid, and I'll be moderating this event today. Boys and Girls Aid is a nonprofit foster and adoption agency that serves youth ages 4 to 21 years of age who are involved in the child welfare system here in the state of Oregon. The children in our foster care programs were not finding stability in traditional care and needed more therapeutic support to succeed and find healing and growth. We are so thankful you've joined us today. Youth in the LGBTQ plus community are overrepresented in foster care, and Boys and Girls Aid believes that our foster parents and staff need to be educated and informed about the specific needs of these unique and amazing kids. Before we begin, I wanted to give a few acknowledgements. The first is to the original people of this land that we inhabit and serve here at Boys and Girls Aid. What we now call Portland, Oregon, and Multnomah County were the traditional lands of the Multnomah, Cathlamet, Clackamas, Cowlitz bands of Chinook, Tualatin Kalapuya, Malala, and many other tribes who made their homes along the Columbia River. Today, people from these bands have become part of the Confederated Tribes of the Grand Ronde, the Confederated Tribes of Siletz Indians, as well as the Chinook Nation and Cowlitz Nation in Washington State. Boys and Girls Aid would also like to acknowledge that systemic racism in our country is inherent within the child welfare system, and that we are responsible for educating, informing, and supporting the Black and Brown communities and communities of color that we serve. It is impossible to have an enlightened discussion about serving oppressed communities without critically acknowledging the role of systemic racism in the way that our foster youth are served, and it is our responsibility to advocate for those youth. In speaking about the LGBTQ plus community, we must understand that this is a community that also stands at an intersection of race, class, and culture. To quote Audre Lorde, the self-described Black lesbian, mother, and feminist, there is no such thing as a single issue struggle because we do not live single issue lives. The LGBTQ plus community represents a vast spectrum of identities and perspectives. We want to remind you that there is no one-size-fits-all answer for the needs of this community. This conversation is representative of our perspectives as members of this community, foster parents, former foster youth, and Boys and Girls Aid staff. We are constantly striving to learn and grow as well. And we also want to celebrate this awesome community and all of the diverse perspectives that it shares. Once again, thank you for your time and energy and openness to having this conversation. A few notes about our webinar. Only our panelists will be able to speak or contribute to the discussion. All attendees who have questions or concerns may address them in an email to me. My email will be provided at the end of the discussion. With that, I'd love to introduce all of our amazing panelists. So we have Persia, a former foster youth. We have Jessica, a current foster parent and member of the Boys and Girls Aid Board of Ambassadors. We have Kelsey and Riley, current foster parents, with us here at Boys and Girls Aid. And we have Sarah, our Boys and Girls Aid staff representative who works in our foster programs here. All right, let's kind of jump on into a conversation around how to support LGBTQ foster youth in care. So Persia, I'd love to start with you and your experience as a former foster youth. Can you please describe your experience of being in foster care?
Yeah, it's a loaded question. I was in foster care 3 different times. The first time I was around 6 years old. My mom struggled with alcoholism. Sorry, this is like very challenging for me right now. It's crazy because I've done a couple of these speeches, and they definitely make your armpits hot. This is kind of one of those situations where I'm like freaking out, so bear with me. Breathe, Persia. No, so 6 years old, my mom got into a DUI accident, and that was the first time that we were admitted into care. if I could even remember, during that time, there was just a lot of confusion, a lot of unanswered questions. I mean, when you're at just that age, you're just kind of being dragged along and kind of told where to go and what to do. So it was just very scary to be in strangers' homes and all of a sudden around everybody that I didn't know. Um, Second time around, I was in, let's see, middle school, 6th grade. I was 12. A lot of domestic violence was happening in my home. And I mean, the foster care system was already involved the entire time. They kind of never really leave you alone once there's issues, but I think it was just enough for them to pull us out of the home again. Um, and by then, my mom had six children. So yeah, that was crazy. And that was one of the hardest times that I did have in foster care. There was um, just a lot of, I mean, I guess I could just say poverty, lack of food, lack of clothing that fit. A lot of times you just get these really small clothing vouchers that maybe amount up to a couple outfits. So definitely struggle there. And being in a growing stage, you need clothes every probably few months as a growing 13, 12-year old. As well as just being in a very unstable environment at the time, being in a home that had biological kids, as well as my siblings being placed with me in and out of that same home. So there was just yeah, just a lot of in and outs. Fast forward, I went back home and my mom was still sick with the disease, so we ended up getting back into care when I was 16. And that's when my social worker found Boys and Girls Aid. Honestly, I feel like this time things really got turned around for me. I had a very involved social worker with the state. She really listened to me. And at 16, I was pretty smart just for everything that I had been through. So I really felt like I got to have input in my life and where I wanted to be and go. And that's when she discovered Boys and Girls Aid. And yeah, I met Rita. Uh, it was a short program. It was probably like 3 months. Sometimes they extended it. And it's kind of where I got the most therapy from all different angles, lots of therapy, just a lot of support, like genuine support, not just, hey, here's a clothing voucher. Hey, make sure she's got a school to go to. It was really like a lot of healing involved during that time. So, and I was in Boys and Girls Aid twice. The first time I got put back into a foster home from the state because they want to find more long-term care for you. That home didn't work out, and then I was asked to go back to Boys and Girls Aid, and Rita was very excited to see me. So yeah, that was my experience.
Thank you so much for sharing. It sounds like obviously this is still really close to home for you. Your experiences are still so foundational to who you are, and I really want to thank you for sharing that. Jessica, I'd love to get your perspective about what drew you into wanting to become a foster parent. What kind of sparked your interest into joining this community and supporting these kids?
Yeah, I have sort of always been interested in growing my family through adoption and thought it would be, a few years before my wife and I started fostering. But we kept hearing stories about how high the need is in Oregon for foster parents and about kids sleeping in hotels. And so we just kind of looked at each other last year and decided to go for it. For us, we believe really strongly, yes, we want to adopt at some point in the future, but we believe really strongly in family reunification and stepping into care for youth. And so, for us, it was about being a support system in the middle of a lot of chaos for kids. So we've only got married last year, but we stepped right into foster care just a few months after getting married. So it's been a really eye-opening experience, but an experience that has taught us a lot and has led us to do a lot more advocacy and get people in our community involved. So yeah, it was a joint decision, but we thought we'd be waiting for a few years, but the need is really high in Oregon. So.
Absolutely. Do you feel like, Jessica, that your desire to foster was motivated by your interest in supporting the LGBTQ community?
Yeah, definitely. My wife and I are very aware of the fact that a lot of youth in care, I think it's around 30% of youth in care identify as part of the LGBTQ community. And it's not just that they need homes that are okay with their sexuality or gender identity. It's that they need homes that are affirming and want to celebrate them and support them. And I think for us as a queer couple, we also want to have youth in our home who see themselves in us and who can see sort of what it looks like to be a part of a queer family. And that was really important to us. And so, for us, it was just part of supporting those youth and making sure that they had a safe place to be, one that wasn't just okay, but also was there to celebrate with them.
Awesome. I really appreciate that. Sarah, this is something that I kind of want to bounce off of what Jessica had to say, that 30% of youth in care identify as part of the community. We use the language here at Boys and Girls Day that the LGBTQ foster youth are overrepresented in care. I'm wondering if you could kind of illuminate what that means a little bit.
Yeah, so when we think about disproportionate or overrepresentation, what we're seeing is that the percentage of youth in care who identify as LGBTQ is much higher than we would expect to see based on the general percentage of the population. So Jessica, your stats were absolutely on point there. So a 2019 study of youth who are self-identifying in LA County schools found that 30% of youth said that, yes, I am LGBTQ and I'm also in foster care, compared to what we see as about 11% in terms of a national average of youth who are self-identify as LGBTQ.
That's interesting, because I do believe that when you're in an unstable environment like the one that Persia described, and you're also questioning your identity, but there might be some other co-occurring kind of mental health needs that go along with serving these youth. Are there some other like mental health concerns that we see for kids who are in the LGBTQ community and foster care that we can be more aware of as staff?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing is just to be aware that it's maybe a higher percentage that a youth who is figuring out their identity or figuring out their sexual orientation or their sexuality is going to be in your home. So just to really embrace that reality and be prepared for it. And also to understand that a big part of being trauma-informed for LGBTQ youth is understanding that before they're in your home, they may have gotten really negative reactions to coming out or expressing their identity. They may have been subject to abuse, harassment, neglect based on even what others perceived, even if they hadn't come out yet, just in terms of kind of stereotypes that other people perceived about these kids. So a big part of being trauma informed is not just being okay with it, but really affirming that identity, like Jessica said, and really celebrating. So if they tell you something, saying, I'm so glad you told me, let's figure out how we can help you feel supported together. That's a big thing.
Thank you so much for sharing that. Kelsey and Riley, I'd like you to kind of expand on this. What are some ways that you find are really important for foster parents to know when they're supporting a youth who identifies as part of the LGBTQ community?
Yeah, I mean, I think the things that we kind of come back to are just that like every youth is different and is going to have a different relationship to their sexuality and gender identity. And so really just like I think we just aim to hold a lot of space, like recognize that like we just want to be a safe container for our youth to do some exploration and ask questions. where I think one of the things that we know is that a lot of youth who like enter spaces that appear neutral around identity they're going to generally read those as like not supportive or unsafe. And so it's really important about signaling however you can that your space is safe and a place where they can like be themselves and explore. And so I think we kind of have just like an explicitly queer home in the ways in which we decorate and the ways in which like we organize our space. And then even just the ways in which we move about our lives, we have a lot of conversations about what's happening in the world. And when we have youth in our home, we invite them into those conversations and invite them into conversations about the people in our lives. So really just thinking about all of the ways in which we can show that there are spaces where you get to be yourself and there's spaces in which you get to explore your process. And so also just not really feeling like youth have to have like a very specific trajectory or a very specific journey around their sexuality or gender identity. And so I think one of the beauties that being queer and trans offers you is just a lot of space for play. And so really encouraging that space for youth and not really like assuming what their next step is going to be or assuming what their next need is going to be, but really just offering a lot of options and curiosity.
Yeah, even just with, media, we have a lot of PG-13 movies that have LGBTQ kind of themes or characters. We've taken queer youth to Pride because Portland Pride is pretty family and youth friendly. Our library system with the Multnomah County Library has great LGBTQ teen resources. And even for youth that we've had in our home, whether or not they identify as part of the queer community, giving them opportunities to identify their own clothes they want to wear, and being fluid as to like they may be out as trans to us, but not making assumptions on how they want to express their gender or sexuality, not making assumptions about who they want to tell or be out to, because I just think every youth is so different. You just really have to let them kind of do the majority of the leading. And I feel like we're really grateful to be able to let kids lead in that way with Boys and Girls Aid.
I love that. I think it's so important to just remember that we are working within a spectrum of identities, and those identities can shift and change. They're never set in stone. And so really, I think providing choice is something that's really, really important. Is there anything that Kelsey or Riley that you have to add about ways that you could provide choice to a youth kind of in a day-to-day environment that would encourage that exploration of play or identity?
I mean, I think one thing, especially for us, is just when we're thinking about like clothes shopping, is really just kind of saying like, are you more excited about men's cut jeans or women's cut jeans? Or like, what section would you like to shop in today? And really just always like responding affirmingly and excitedly to whatever the youth asks for. So if they're excited about dresses today when we're shopping, great. If they're excited about baggy t-shirts and jeans tomorrow, wonderful too. And just like always really showing up with like affirmation and excitement with wherever they're at. I think, just staying curious about like, are the pronouns that you're using still feeling like the right pronouns, or the name that you're using still feeling like the right name? I think, not in a way that we like ask every day, but just really signaling to youth that that's something that gets to change if they want it to change. And even I think that happens just in our talking about the people in our lives. So being able to say like, oh yeah, so-and-so is going by this name now, or so-and-so actually just started using they, them pronouns, and really just letting the youth see that that is a really normal part of our process. And then just, being open for conversations and open to answer questions or ask curious questions about what they're seeing in their world.
Mm-hmm. I think that's it.
Awesome. I love it. Thank you for sharing. I think times have really shifted. I mean, these conversations are definitely more apparent, especially in the world of foster care and language and the way that we're approaching these conversations. And so, Persia, I'm wondering for you, how was your experience as a foster youth with some of these conversations around your identity and sexuality? Was that available for you at all? Was it a safe place to have discussions?
Well, first off, just hearing you guys talk about the way you come about LGBTQ youth is comforting, because I wish that I would have experienced a little bit more of that openness. I was involved in a religious home, very loving, very open, and just open-minded people. During that time, I think in anybody's life, being 16, there's just a lot that's happening with your identity already. So to kind of be having this experience with your sexuality and to be in a home that's very religious and clearly very against these things, it was something I knew that I had to go about on my own. I wasn't afraid to. I thank goodness for that I was pretty sure within myself of like what I wanted, who I wanted. I wish though that I definitely had that curiosity, and that was probably the biggest thing that stood out, that you guys said, was just curiosity is enough. Like, we all like to talk about ourselves to a certain extent. We all like to be asked about. So at that age, I just would have even appreciated, hey, like, what is going on for you? Hey, you're dating a girlfriend. Let's talk about that. Like, it just kind of was this elephant in the room. I felt love. I felt warmth, and I just kind of felt also that it was an uncomfortable topic, to say the least, and that I was just going to be who I was, and that was just going to be what they got. It's not to be talked about though. So yeah.
I can identify with that, just the experience of how hard it is to have these conversations, how our society doesn't really prepare us to, and how really, really important it is that we're educating ourselves, that we're learning the language, we're learning to create safe spaces, and how big of a difference that can make in the life of a young person. So I think that as an agency with Boys and Girls Aid, we've definitely made it a point to ensure that our foster parents are really acknowledging the importance of these conversations. And we're learning that based on your experience and the experiences of other youth have come before you. Sarah, I'd like to transition the conversation to you. We've talked a lot about having a initial conversation about identity, initial conversation about sexuality, but that doesn't end. As Kelsey and Riley mentioned, it can keep changing, it can keep growing and flowing. So how do we support our foster parents to create safe boundaries for these kids so that they can be in a place that they're still able to grow and explore their identities, but they're not vulnerable to trauma or abuse or being taken advantage of? How do we help our parents create safe boundaries for these youth and still letting them grow in their identities?
Yeah, that's a great question, Katie. And I think a lot of times it can be a balance. I think when we think about kind of teen relationships, oftentimes we'll think of like volatility and a lot of feelings. And I think the biggest thing to keep in mind is, like Kelsey and Riley said, to stay curious and be flexible so that when those conversations do come up and maybe your teenager comes to you or, you kind of notice something, like it sounds like in Purge's family, it was noticed, but it never was really talked about. So what we like to do as a certification department is offer continuous support. So to talk about having conversations and then, maybe talking about other people in your life, oh, so-and-so just got married, her wife is lovely, or, his husband is wonderful, or, they are doing so great in college. So kind of just using that representation in your own language can really help kids feel more free and represented, because the idea of heteronormativity is pretty pervasive in our society, right? So we, even as queer people, sometimes we can fall into it too and assume that most people are going to be straight. So just kind of giving a different menu of options throughout your placement with a youth. So you might have a youth for 30 days, you might have them for 2 years, and really understanding that those identities can really change from when you're 13 to when you're 14. Most teenagers are going to be a completely different person than when they roll around to that 14 age. So continuing to offer positive representation. I loved what Kelsey and Riley said of having queer media resources. Maybe it's going to different events where they can feel seen and represented. Because I think that's so important for teenagers, is that they can feel that they're not alone and that there are other people in the world like them. And we're lucky our world is a really diverse place. And so what certification tries to do is we say, hey, if you're not quite sure where to take this young person to, have themselves be seen and feel represented, please come talk to us. We're full of ideas. We'd love to give you some. So offering continued support and education as well in our foster parent training. So we've had SMIRC, the Sexual Minority Youth Resource training program called Bridge 13, come out and talk with our foster parents. So just getting updated on the lingo, right? Some vocabulary, because that can really also signal to kids if a foster parent uses, for example, like the word queer instead of homosexual. That might signal to a foster youth like, okay, maybe this foster youth is like maybe more with it than I originally thought. So kind of keeping up on some of those language cues that can really help create safety in relationships, and just continuing to have those conversations and staying flexible and curious, I think is the best thing we can do as adults in these kids' lives.
Absolutely. I think there's a really important piece where our foster parents are still sometimes learning as well, right? And that as long as they kind of come to the table with openness and willingness to learn, and okay, well, why would someone choose to be called a pansexual instead of a bisexual? Like, they were using this term before and now they're using this term. I don't understand. What are the differences here? Or what does it mean to use gender neutral pronouns? Or why would we put an X in this word instead of just keeping it this way? There's so many changes that are constantly happening. And so having the supportive staff, having these interactive trainings can be really, really essential, just to helping people feel like, okay, we can learn, we can grow together and make sure that we're having these conversations. Jessica, I'd like to go to you now. I'm just wondering, how do you work with kind of sharing information with other members of your community about what you're doing in foster care and the work you're doing with these kids?
Yeah, we are kind of, obviously when you're a foster parent, it's a huge part of your identity. So having conversations with our community and talking about the importance of supporting youth in care. Our friends probably get annoyed that we talk about it too much, but it really has made a difference. We have had friends who have seen our journey in foster care and, 6 months ago were saying, oh, maybe I should become a foster parent. I don't know, like I should ask some more questions. And we actually had a friend who just recently decided to become emergency certified as a foster parent and took in a trans teen. And it was one of those friends that we had been talking about this for 6 months with, and it was just kind of the thing that put her over the edge to become a foster parent. And so for us, it's about sharing and involving our community as well, not just talking to them about it, but giving them chances to step up. So we try to highlight, when there's opportunities to donate to help youth in care or to volunteer and help youth in care. And I think what's been really heartening for us as new foster parents is how much our community wants to step up and how much the community, when given the opportunity, wants to be involved and help kids in care. We've kind of been blown away actually by the support that we've gotten, which is exciting. But I think really it's about continuing to have conversations and giving people the opportunity to get involved, because oftentimes becoming a foster parent is a long process. People don't just think about becoming a foster parent and do it the next week. It's a lot of education. It's a lot of, maybe volunteering with youth in care or listening to podcasts or talking to foster parents. And so continuing to have those conversations, you're planting seeds that may result in people getting involved in the future with the foster care system.
That's awesome. I do think that word of mouth piece is really important to foster care. A lot of people just don't know the amount of need or how many kids are in child welfare on any given night and what that looks like to move through the system. And so, just saying, hey, this is what we're doing can really just set a spark in someone else. I would like to ask you, Persia, what kind of message would you like to send to people who might be interested in becoming a foster parent, and what kind of thinking should they do? What kind of processing should they do before they start this process of taking a foster youth into their homes?
I think it definitely goes back to education, about many different topics. Being in foster care, you're typically there because there's a lot of trauma happening in your home. So educating yourself around all those different kinds of traumas, how you can be of support of every single one, and even being open to that therapy. I think I just think curiosity and education is huge. Yeah.
Awesome. Makes me wonder, Sarah, what are we looking for in people who are interested in fostering? Like, what kind of qualities or aspects, when we meet with someone face to face and they're like, yes, I want to foster, what kind of skills or abilities or what do they need to?
Yeah, I've got your drift, I think. Yes, so definitely flexibility, openness, and communication are the things that I'm always kind of looking for right off the bat, because we know that relationships and connection that's what's really going to make a difference, right? It literally takes one adult in a young person's life that they have a strong connection with to turn the tide and give them that felt safety that then they can start to grow. So what I'm always looking for is adults who are interested in connecting with young people, right? Who are going to maybe let that young person take the lead, like Kelsey and Riley said, who are going to be curious, like Persia said, who are going to be able to seek out support. And I think of it kind of like being brave, right? So if you don't know the answer, instead of kind of sitting in silence, go ahead and raise your hand, send us an email, give us a phone call, because probably you're not the first person who's wondering about this, right? So there are a lot of resources out there. And then just really flexibility, because people's pronouns can change day to day, how they can identify and change day to day, how they want to dress and do their hair can all change. So just kind of rolling with it and being open to letting the kid be the expert in their own lives and really following their lead is so important. And then just also having a sense of humor, right? So we're all going to mess up, right? So being able to kind of reflect and laugh at yourself, right? And say, okay, I didn't get it this time, but I'll do better next time, right? We're all doing the best we can. So that's kind of the big picture approach, I would say.
Thank you for sharing that. Yeah, I think it's a really big step. You mentioned bravery. Like that's huge. It's such an unknown world, and you're working with kids from all different backgrounds, and there's a chance that you might not know the answers. And so that makes me wonder, Kelsey and Riley, what are some of the fears that you had to get through and approach to, decide to foster? Like, what did that process look like for you?
I mean, it's been interesting because I think the things that I anticipated being hard are mostly haven't come up in our home. So we had fear, or I think I personally had fears of being a queer household. We have it in our household rules that we've written that every youth reads when they come into our home, that we are an LGBTQ home family, that we don't tolerate any any bigotry and like words of bigotry towards any communities, and just being like, well, what if youth come in using bigoted language, or that's the norm at their home, or what if they're negative towards us? And we haven't seen any of that. I think there's a lot of negative portrayals of foster youth in media, and of like youth being violent or youth, you know, behaving a certain way towards their foster parents. And again, like we haven't really dealt with that, but I think there were some initial sort of like bringing any stranger into your home is a vulnerable thing. And I do feel like Boys and Girls Aid prepared us, to, you know, with a lot of training, with a lot of support through the certification process. But yeah, there were just some kind of unknowns. And I think every time a youth comes into our house, I have some butterflies still of like, what is this youth's background? What are their triggers? What are the things that they need more support with? And where would maybe my strengths kind of match with what they need, and where are there places where I could kind of grow and learn more? What about you, Riley?
I think that's mostly it. I think it's just it's scary to do a new thing, and fostering is a new thing. It's a new relationship dynamic where you go from being strangers to being in a household together. That's an intimate thing. It's like sharing your home with another person. And so I think just feeling scared about what building a relationship would look like, and what kind of it would look like to move into the day-to-day.
Awesome. I appreciate that. Yeah, I think that working at Boys and Girls Aid specifically, I've heard a lot of these buzzwords that tend to scare people, you know, challenging behaviors or therapeutic care, or this child wasn't stable in this environment. And it's almost similar to the things that we do to the LGBTQ community, where we're putting a label, but you know, there's so much more underneath that youth, that once we're able to kind of peel back these labels and these titles, we can see that there's just a child there who needs our support and help, and needs to feel safe in all aspects of their life, not just in their identity and sexuality, but in their need to eat balanced meals, their need to wear clothes that fit and feel comfortable and match their identity. And so I'm curious about the way that we kind of support these intersectional identities. And I'm wondering, Sarah, if you could kind of speak to this. You know, the places where trauma and culture and sexuality and gender identity all meet for these really unique and special kids that we're working with.
Yeah, so that's definitely a really big question. And I think it's something that where continuous learning and education is really important. So our foster parent community has a lot of knowledge. And so we really want to encourage collaboration. And so definitely when we're thinking about, you know, especially when we're approaching training, right? So if we're coming through and we're talking about something like adverse childhood experiences, right? So or ACEs, right? So these traumatic experiences that we know are going to affect development for kids, right? So that development might come in the form of behaviors that maybe are not quite where we'd expect to see for their age. It might come in terms of lagging skills. So maybe, you know, hygiene or being able to like manage their emotions or their time is not quite where we'd expect it to be. So we try to give foster parents as much information as possible to help them feel a little bit more kind of like prepared and maybe like armored up for the things that they're about to interact with kids. But it's also really important to realize that all of our kids are individuals, right? So we really need to tailor our approach and we need to be compassionate and empathetic, because the things that worked really well with maybe the kid that we were hanging out with in April are not going to go very well with the kid we have now in June. So really establishing a system of like consultation and support. So encouraging foster parents to reach out to caseworkers, to reach out to their youth care counselors. I think is so important. And then also just really embracing the idea of intersectionality, right? Is that we don't live just in one plane, right? So if someone is, you know, queer and they are disabled, or if they are struggling with English as a second language, that we're going to have a myriad of challenges. And so we have to address all of those in concert so that this young person can find some more success, right? It's not helpful if we address all of these aspects of their identity in a fragmented way. So that's what we really try to do as staff, is work with foster parents to help them feel supported as they work with these youth, so that they have tools in their toolkit to address things that are going to come up. But absolutely a very complicated question in how we deal with the intersectional nature of our youth, and then combining on that with trauma and the developmental effects that that can have in their lives. So we do our best, and we really try to adjust and make things personal to each individual.
Thank you so much. I threw a curveball at you there.
It's a spicy question.
You really handled that one, so I appreciate it. Persia, this makes me think about your experience that you mentioned with your caseworker, Rita, and that the joy that she had and celebration that she had for you. Can you speak about like what that kind of encouragement can do in the life of youth and in your experience?
Yes. Rita was actually my Boys and Girls Aid foster mom.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No, you're fine. Will you repeat your question?
So how did Rita's joy and celebration of you, how did that encouragement and support make a difference in your life?
Huge. I mean, I think one of the biggest things that I think a lot of foster youth deal with is just being in strangers' homes over and over again. And it's a new adjustment every time to how these people live. And, you know, you kind of know that you're that, I don't know, you kind of just feel like the intruder, you know, like I'm not really welcome here. So that's actually what led me back to Rita, was being in a foster home where, again, a lot's happening, self-harm, self-discovery, like just a lot's happening. So you really have to be emotionally stable as best as you can in order to take, you know, a youth with trauma. And Rita just really let me know that, like, she was willing to take any load that I had to give. She could handle it. And I think that expression alone is so comforting when all you're doing is being passed around. So like, you're welcomed, I love you, I'm excited that you're here, you're so important. And I don't think that's really said enough when all this chaos is happening in your life, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. Love is so important. It's really nice to be in an agency that honors love. It's so foundational. It is so, it's like air, it's like oxygen, right? These kids need it more than anything. At this point in time, I'd like to just offer a question to any of our panelists who feels like they have a success story to share. A story of a youth that they've worked with, maybe a challenging situation that they were able to move through, obviously with safe respect to a youth's identity, but to just kind of, I don't know, share with us a moment of triumph and encouragement and joy that you've had as a foster parent, or as a foster youth, or staff.
I can start. So our most recent placement, when she first came to us, had never actually met gay people before, and was one, she felt comfortable, kind of openly shared with me that at her last foster home that they hadn't spoken kindly of gay people, and that she thought she didn't like gay people. And to watch the transformation she went through from having never met gay people before to, you know, as a middle schooler, starting to question her sexuality and what that might be, and consume queer media for teens, and it was just really heartening to see that transformation and to see her become comfortable in our home, and feel comfortable speaking with us about the questions that she was having, and really building that safe space for her to ask questions, not just about herself, but about the queer community. And any questions she had was really a special process to go through her and with her, and to see the progress she made, not only opening her eyes to sort of different people that she may encounter, but also gave her the space to ask that question of herself, which was a very cool moment. So
thank you for sharing that. I really appreciate that. We need parents from different identities and cultures and homes and lifestyles, because there is no cookie cutter model of a family. So thank you for sharing that. Anyone else? Yeah.
We had a more recent youth who was living with a parent who really struggled with addiction. And he was out as bisexual or questioning. His dad, who he was living with, was really homophobic and very openly hostile about his child's sexuality. And I think through living with us and just getting to know this youth, just getting to see him have the option of making more choices. And we were just talking, we're pretty sure that he graduated high school this year. When he came into our home, he was way behind. He was going to have to take another year of high school, and was actually working on the weekends, both Saturday and Sunday. So he would go to school every day and then work the weekends, and was kind of like financially supporting a little bit his family. And I just, I know that I really appreciated our time with him, and just giving him, again, that like openness, kind of having these hard conversations about what he'd experienced at home, and really just affirming that he could kind of like date who he wanted or make a lot of different, whatever choices he wanted, that he really had a lot of options with all kinds of things, was just, I think, a really positive experience that we've had. And we've had a lot of LGBTQ youth and questioning youth come through our home, and have had a lot of success stories. I don't know if you have anything.
Yeah, I think one of the things that I just think about, or I come back to, is one of the things that feels really good to be able to offer youth in our home, kind of no matter what, is just different possibility models. So the image of people who might have experienced their own trauma, but did the work to be in a different place in their lives. Or, and yeah, I think especially like we still get a lot of media that is like about sad murders of trans people, or like how queer people end up alone. And so I think seeing a family and like a partnership that is like very loving and very supportive, and me as a trans person having a life with a career and like a lot of stability and happiness and love, I think it's just a way to say like, there are lots of ways that your life can go, and you can at any time like choose to like make a different decision or turn a different corner and see what could happen. And so I think that's always just been the gift, is just offering a different view of what could be.
Yeah, I really want to echo that. I think the power of positive representation, exactly like what you said, that there are a lot of really sad, really depressing stories about queer people. So I think the more that we can show them that, you know, being LGBTQ, being queer is not something that's going to end your life, that you still can have positive relationships, you can still find safety and acceptance and inclusion of your identities, is so important for young people.
Well, I think that is just a great place to end our conversation today. I think ending with the possibilities, the encouragement, the joy that you can find in being who you are. And that's the work that we're trying to do with these kids. So I just want to thank everyone who joined as an attendee to watch this conversation, our amazing panelists, Jessica, Persia, Kelsey, Riley, and Sarah. Your insight and perspectives has been just so wonderful. I'm really, really thankful for the opportunity to come and discuss the LGBTQ community, kids in foster care, and what we're doing to advocate for them and to make sure that they can live in joy and be celebrated. So I'm going to finish up by displaying the slide with my email address. That's KMATTEN, kmatten at boysandgirls8.org. If you are interested in following up with me, if you have any questions about the way that we serve our youth, how we support our families, or maybe what it takes to become a foster parent with us, you're more than welcome to reach out to me. But I just hope that everyone has a wonderful evening and that their identities and their perspectives feel valued and celebrated as well. Thank you so much for being here today.
Happy Pride!
Happy Pride, everyone!
Happy Pride!